Hello there. This lecture will introduce you to many important concepts related to employee training. So, once the employer has selected qualified applicants, it's then important to provide a really thorough orientation, also access to relevant training, and then eventually opportunities to develop skills and abilities that will probably apply to more long term career goals. So, employee training is a planned effort by an organization to facilitate employees' learning, retention, and job related behavior. And honestly, in most cases, training isn't really limited to new employees. It should occur at all stages of one's career. So, organizations really need to provide a wide variety of training needs in order to remain competitive. So, especially in today's market where technology is always getting more and more sophisticated and always being used more and more in the workplace, you have to constantly be providing training or at least opportunities for your employees to receive training elsewhere where they can actually beef up on those skills and be effective in the workplace. Also, with globalization, cultural competence has become a pretty important issue. So you don't want to embarrass yourself if you're interacting with, colleagues or with partners in different countries. You want to make sure that you have the training so that you don't go and make a fool of yourself. So I'll quickly focus on employee orientation and onboarding. Orientation is the initial, HR paperwork and the procedural aspects of being employed, and then onboarding is more of a personal approach to getting employees assimilated into the work environment. Then I'll move on to the role of training. So what is training designed to improve? And then training needs analysis, or the process of identifying what types of behaviors you want to train for and if it's a good time for that training based on the organizational culture or funds or other constraints. Then I'll spend a bit of time about developing the training program and the best practices for doing that, and then a couple of different types of commonly used training in the workplace. And then finally, I'll end on how to evaluate training success using research, and then a special type of training called career development, where it's a more broad based type of training and improvement of employee skills. So, orientation and onboarding are all about first impressions and maintaining happy employees throughout their time at the organization. Orientation, again, is more about the procedural aspects, and then onboarding is more about the interpersonal aspects. So, employee orientation programs are designed to introduce new employees to the organization. So, it's really just exposing new hires to the goals, the policies, and the procedures associated with your organization. Now, employee orientation helps acquaint employees with the chain of command, the different departments and divisions, what type of compensation they can expect, and the benefits that they'll be offered, and even safety rules and procedures. So, while orientation is really just the process of introducing a new employee to the job, onboarding is more about the process of integrating or assimilating new hires into a company. So, orientation is kind of an impersonal, broad, singular occurrence that's really just intended to familiarize the new hire with the procedures of the company. But onboarding is more of an ongoing process that really just keeps that initial momentum of starting a new job going long into the first year after a new hire starts their job. So you can see on the screen the different things that orientation and onboarding involves. And also, I encourage you to click the link at the bottom of the screen there to see Facebook's really neat approach to onboarding engineers. It's really interesting. So some other things I want to note about the difference between orientation and onboarding. So human resources really plays a key role in the early recruitment and orientation phase of employees and in sort of guiding the onboarding process. But really, the hiring manager should really be engaged in facilitating that employee's successful integration into the organization over time. So, you really want the management and even the other employees to participate in the onboarding process because it's more of an interpersonal thing than just, policies and procedures. So onboarding is really great because it builds the company's reputation for being a thoughtful employer with great training and clear leadership and a strong organizational culture. So it also helps retain staff members and it gets the new employees to more sufficient productivity levels more quickly. Onboarding is also great because it really helps build a cohesive team, and that's really what drives the increase in everybody's productivity. So, training is really important for several reasons. First things first, if organizations are having difficulty selecting the desired applicants with the necessary knowledge and skills to perform the job, they're really going to have to rely on training to compensate for that inability, right? They have to use training to help those employees become better at performing their job and get up to speed. Also, training is important because jobs change. So employees may have the necessary competencies to perform a job one year, but then the next year, the demands or procedures change and the employee is no longer capable of performing the job with their current level of skill and knowledge. So, training can really help fill in the gaps in skill or knowledge that the employee can perform their job well. Also, no employee is the complete package. You're rarely going to find an employee who has perfected every technical and interpersonal knowledge and skill. In short, there's always room for improvement. So, although the ultimate goal of training is always to increase an organization's profits by trying to maximize the outputs of the workforce, altogether, organizations understand the importance of training by spending more than $58.5 billion on it each year. And according to a study conducted in 2005, some major organizations spend an average of 2.3% of their payroll on training, and this totals an average of $1,202 spent on training on each employee each year. So training is extremely expensive. So given that organizations spend a ton of money and resources training their employees, it's really important to make sure that the training is effective. So, this lecture will also explain many of the best practices for training and getting the most cost efficient and effective ways to train your employees. Just making sure that the training is actually working and worth the money. So, before an employer or an HR manager selects a training program for employees, it's really important to determine training needs, both from the macro organizational perspective, from the job perspective or the task perspective, and while also considering the individual needs of employees. So, the purpose of the organizational analysis is to determine those organizational factors that either facilitate or inhibit training effectiveness. And a properly conducted organizational analysis will focus on the goals that the organization wants to achieve and also the extent to which training will help to facilitate those goals. The organizational analysis should also focus on the organization's ability to conduct training in general, right? You really have to consider, do you have the finances, the space, and the time to make training work for you? And if not, you need to select more or less time consuming, maybe less expensive types of training tools. You also need to consider the organizational climate for training. So, is there a culture of management support and supervisor support where they really want to help their employees learn and the employees are eager to learn and train and increase their skills? If so, then you're probably in an organizational climate where training will be able to take hold more effectively. So, a task analysis is really just a product of the job analysis. And remember, a job analysis is the process of collecting information from employees and supervisors and through surveys and observation to understand the requirements of a job and the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to perform the job well. So, the task analysis is really all about identifying the tasks involved with the job, also identifying the conditions under which those tasks are performed. So, are you inside? Are you outside? Are you in danger? What's going on at the job site? And then again, figuring out those competencies of those knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics that employees need to perform tasks under those conditions. Also, task analysis helps identify how tasks are learned so you can target training to the tasks that are most appropriate for that type of training. Not only do you want to think about the different types of training, but also if training is something that's appropriate at all. And you also want to consider, are there some things that we expected employees to come to the job with, expected at the time of hire? And if you have a really good selection system that does help you predict performance, there's a lot of training that'll be unnecessary because the employees will be expected to have that at the time of hire, and you'll be pretty confident that they actually do. So you can see an example of a task analysis down here at the bottom of the slide where you just highlight the different tasks involved with the job. And this example is related to bank tellers, right? So answering questions about interest rates and processing transactions and calming crazy irate customers with bank balances they don't agree with. So those sorts of tasks are involved with being a bank teller. And then you would also want to identify what is the best way for these different tasks to be trained. So maybe you just want to give them a reference tool, like a basic rate chart, just a handout or something they can refer to when memorization isn't necessarily required, right? So it may be impressive for your bank teller to have the interest rate for mortgages memorized. But I'll tell you what, if I was sitting there talking to one and they just spouted it off their head, I don't know if I'd be as confident as if I saw them actually look it up. So that's just something you don't have to worry about training for. Also, there's simulation exercises, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then just, basic teller training, which could be a video or maybe a written reference material with a quiz. The third and final step in the needs analysis process is determining which employees need training in which areas. So now we're starting to narrow our focus to the individual level and look at person analysis. So person analysis is based on the recognition that not every employee needs further training for every task performed. So to determine the individual training needs for each employee, person analysis uses performance appraisal scores, surveys, interviews, skill and knowledge tests, and critical incidences that the supervisor recorded where, they did something really well or they did something really poorly. And all those things are taken together to identify the individual training needs for employees. So for example, let's say that trainers at Applebee's restaurants test management trainees on essential on-the-job tasks. And when the trainee demonstrates proficiency through a knowledge test or observation, the training ends. So some management trainees complete the program in half the time it takes others. So you're basing training on the specific needs of individuals, and that saves time and it's more effective. And it prevents frustration where you have somebody who is continuously being assessed for something that they're already really proficient at. So here's an example of a person analysis based on the most recent performance appraisal scores for bank tellers. And you can see organization is really important, and also having a numeric value associated with performance is really important because it makes it easier to compare different employees for a person analysis. So we have Dexter, Walter, Jesse, and Piper. So our 4 bank teller employees, and each employee was rated individually for different aspects of their performance. And the ratings are based on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being the poorest level of performance and 5 being as good as it gets. So if I'm just looking at this, I can see that Dexter is having a little bit of problems with his drawer accuracy and not doing so well with bank services knowledge. So I would target those things first for training. And then maybe if those go well, you could maybe start targeting cross-selling as an area for training for Dexter. Then you see Walter is in desperate need of some training in cross-selling and learning customers' names. Jesse is looking like a really good employee, maybe focus on names, but overall I would probably just leave him alone and let him do his thing. Then we look at Piper. Piper's doing pretty well, but cross-selling seems to be a weakness, so you could target training for cross-selling to Piper. And then, you could see that, both Walter and Piper need cross-selling training. So you could train those 2 employees together to save time and to help them help each other. So once you've identified the tasks that you're going to target with training, you need to develop a training program that's targeted at specific goals and objectives associated with the tasks that you want employees to learn how to perform. That's also going to be motivating and engaging for employees. And that is the absolute best method for delivering the training that you decided on. The first step in developing a training program is to establish the goals and objectives for the training. So you need to know what you're trying to accomplish before you can start accomplishing it. The goals and objectives of the training program must be feasible too. So you have to think about the time and resources that are going to be needed to allocate to the training. So for example, at the end of a 4-hour training session for shift supervisors on conflict management, it's probably unreasonable to expect supervisors to have the skills to successfully diffuse a potentially threatening situation with customers. A more reasonable goal after only 4 hours of training would be that supervisors would be able to identify the common causes of conflict, but not necessarily have the skills to diffuse a conflict in a role play situation or in the real world. So, training goals and objectives should concretely state the following. So, what you want learners or trainees to do, what they're expected to do, the conditions under which they're expected to do it, and the level at which they're expected to do it. So you want to create objective statements that include an action word, so what they're actually doing, an item, what they're doing it to, the conditions, so the situation, and then the standard for performance. Clarity is really important when you're setting your goals so that you can later go back and see if you met the specific criteria set in your original goals. So here are some examples of action statements that incorporate the action word, the item, the condition, and the standard under which the action is performed. So you see by the end of this training session, here are some concrete things that you should be able to do. Action statements are really similar to course objectives that are stated in your syllabi at Nevada State College. So you can just take a look at these and see how they meet those criteria for an effective action statement. So for a training program to be really effective, employees must be motivated to attend a training, perform well in the training, and later apply their knowledge from their training to their jobs. Now, the most obvious way to motivate employees to attend training is to make it mandatory and require them to attend the training on the clock. However, most training programs are optional, and when the training program is optional, there are several ways to motivate employees to attend training. So some ways to motivate employees to attend training is to have training on the clock and provide workload reductions to those who opt to attend the training. So that'll help reduce the stress associated with attending training and encourage them to participate. Also, you can try to increase employee buy-in of the training by relating the training to employees' immediate job. So for example, employees are going to be pretty motivated to attend a training session on new software that is going to be used company-wide in 2 weeks, right? So they need to have a sense of urgency about completing the training. Now, if you had training on a less pertinent sounding topic such as future trends in office software, employees may be less motivated to attend. But again, if you emphasize that you're going to need to know this training in 2 weeks, they are going to understand the importance of attending. Also, you can increase employee buy-in by having the employees actually play a role in choosing the training and planning the types of training that are offered. So giving employees a voice and how they learn how to acquire new skills on the job is going to help them be interested and motivated to attend and also probably to apply what they learn on the job because they helped create it, so they see the direct connection. So motivating employees to attend training is really only a part of the battle, right? So you want to have employees also motivated to learn because they're going to perform better in the training and they're also going to be better at applying their training later. So this motivation to perform well in training is often related to the employee's perception that there's an incentive to learning. So types of incentives used to motivate learning include job security. So employees must stay current with technology to remain an effective member of the team and to keep their job. Self-improvement or, becoming more culturally competent or learning about the latest and greatest methods of performing your job. That helps you make you feel more confident in work, right? So self-improvement is something that can motivate you to perform well so that you're more confident and competent in the workplace. Also, knowing that training could be linked to opportunities for advancement or to enter a new position is going to be really motivating because employees are usually seeking the opportunity to be promoted and make more money. Also, you can motivate employees to perform well by making training fun. Have some really cool games and fun activities that they get to participate in with fellow employees. And if you get desperate, just give them food. Food always works. You can also have, in addition to, making the training exciting, you can have incentives that are really contingent upon a variety of factors. So you have to complete the training program to receive a specific incentive, or you have to demonstrate this new knowledge or skill to receive this bonus or incentive. This will help increase actual performance. So, a common incentive for actual job performance is called skill-based pay, in which employees must be able to demonstrate their mastery of the newly taught skill to receive a bump in pay. So it's not just that you attend training and you get this bump in pay, it's that you have to demonstrate that you learned something from the training and that you have the skills to earn that bump in pay. Also, again, employees will be more motivated to learn when the training program is interesting. And you can make a topic interesting by making it relevant to the employees' lives, having those fun interactive activities, having discussion of interesting topics. Also, use a variety of training techniques. So, lecture, discussion, activities, and videos. Humor and stories are also really good, and maximizing audience participation really helps keep people engaged. In an effort to get employees more, warmed up and ready to participate, you can use icebreakers. These really help employees get to know each other, wake up, and kind of set the tone for the rest of the training that requires active participation. Now, another essential aspect of motivating employees to learn is to provide feedback. So, you want to let employees know how they're doing and give them praise when they deserve it and give them constructive criticism when they need it. But you need to strike a delicate balance between too much and too little feedback. So the employee is not going to learn if there's too little feedback provided. But if you provide too much or maybe overly detailed feedback, that could cause frustration and the employee will not learn very well either. So, of course, just make sure you're giving positive feedback when an employee correctly performs a task during training. And praise helps provide that incentive to continue correct behavior. It always feels good to be recognized. Then again, if an employee is not performing a task correctly, it's best to provide feedback, but make sure that you have concrete behavioral examples or critical incidences of how the employee can perform and how they can improve. So specific is important, right? You don't just want to say, you're not very good with customers. You want to be able to point to, oh, well, 2 weeks ago, I think it was a Friday, I saw you interact with the customer and you were really rude when they were asking you about interest rates and you were acting like they should already know that information. And you really need to avoid making the customers feel stupid. So again, specific feedback with a concrete example is the best way to motivate employees to perform well during and after the training. Now, once employees have gathered skills from a training program, it is essential that they apply their newly acquired knowledge and skills on the job shortly after completing the training. So, employees are most likely to apply their knowledge and skills if supervisors encourage and reward them for doing so. So, the supervisor plays a really important role in the transfer of training. So if the supervisor sets goals and provides feedback and actively encourages the use of training and also models the behaviors learned in the training, then the employees will be more motivated to use their training on the job. So the use of training can also be reinforced by having employees set goals and by communicating the past usefulness of the training program to employees. So again, getting those employees invested in what they want to accomplish based on the training. So once you have set your goals and your objectives and you've figured out how you think employees will be best motivated, the next step in developing a training program is to choose the training method that will best accomplish those goals and objectives. Now, I'm going to start with classroom training, but it's important that you understand that because most training programs have multiple goals and objectives, the best training programs often use a variety of methods so employees will understand the reasons for doing a task, how it should be done, and in what situations it should be done. So the first consideration that you should make when preparing for classroom training is understanding your audience. So the characteristics of the audience play a really important role in developing a training program. The trainer should consider the size, demographics, and ability of their anticipated audience. So for example, role play and discussion-based lecture will not work so well with 250 people, right? That's too large of an audience to have an effective discussion. Also, references to blogs and Twitter may not resonate with older employees. So just considering the interests and knowledge and readiness of your audience. You also want to consider the ability level of the audience members, right? That's an important factor. So if they're low on ability or experience, the training will need to proceed at a slower pace to be effective, or maybe have some remedial information given before the training begins. If the trainees are fairly experienced and knowledgeable, then the training should be challenging enough so that employees learn and don't become bored or feel like the training was useless. Now, unfortunately, most audiences that we encounter in training and in the classroom too have mixed levels of expertise and preferred learning styles. So, to account for audience differences, most trainers present material at a moderate pace and try to encourage questions from those who may fall behind. Also, offering a variety of training methods will help ensure that you are reaching your target audience in at least one of the ways that they prefer. Now, in addition to considering your audience while developing a presentation for training, the trainer must also research the topic, develop a training outline or a timeline for the training process, create visuals, create handouts, and obtain supportive materials like video clips and exercises. You just really want to have that variety in your training program. So, the purpose of a handout is to provide material that trainees can take back with them to their jobs. And providing comprehensive notes is really important because research suggests that people tend to forget about 3/4 of the training content in the first 48 hours. Now, once employees have received the information they need through a lecture, it's important that they're able to apply what they have learned. So, one way to do this is through case studies. So, you can have trainees analyze case studies, and this is similar to a leaderless group discussion and situational interview. So with this method, members of a small group each read a case that is typical of those encountered on the job. Then the group discusses the case, identifies possible solutions, evaluates the advantages and disadvantages of each solution, and then eventually arrives on what they think the best solution to the problem is based on what was learned in the training. So they're taking what they've learned and they're applying it. And you can observe people doing these case studies to see who really got the most out of the training and who becomes a leader in those discussions. Now, while case studies are effective in applying knowledge and learning problem-solving skills, simulation exercises allow the trainee to practice newly learned skills. So simulations offer the advantage of allowing the trainee to work with equipment under actual working conditions. So it's more realistic than a case study. Now, whatever the method used, a simulation is only effective if it is physically and psychologically similar to the actual working environment. Again, that's the major advantage of a simulation. Whereas simulations are effective for learning how to use new equipment or software programs, role play really allows for the trainee to perform necessary interpersonal skills by acting out simulated roles. Now, role play is used in many types of training situations, from supervisors practicing performance appraisal reviews to even sales clerks taking customer orders. Now, through role play, it allows employees to practice what is being taught. Now, they're not for everyone. Many employees feel uneasy and embarrassed about being required to sort of act. So, another alternative is to have employees be required to do real play. So this is when employees practice job skills on actual customers, so they don't feel as silly when they're doing it. So you could have employees sit around a conference table and take turns making sales calls. And then between each call, you could discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the call. So you unleash this, trainee on the public, and then you critically critique how that went. And if you're worried about customer perceptions, you can always warn the customer, hey, so-and-so is a trainee, and, they're doing some simulated training today on the job. Now, one of the most successful training methods for interpersonal behavior is called behavioral modeling. And with behavioral modeling, trainees role play ideal behavior rather than the behavior that comes to them naturally or that they would normally exhibit. So the behavioral modeling technique begins with a discussion of the problem in a scenario, why it occurred, and the employee behaviors necessary to correct the problem. So these behaviors are called learning points, and they're essentially rules to follow in solving a problem. So next, trainees view a video of employees correctly and incorrectly solving the problem. Then the trainees can take notes during the tape and are encouraged to ask questions like, why is this an appropriate way to handle a customer complaint? Then once they view the video and they see employees correctly and incorrectly solving the problems in the scenario, they're asked to mentally rehearse the solution to the problem in the way that the employee solved it in the video. So they're mentally rehearsing, oh, this is what I would do if something like this happened. Finally, employees role play those situations and receive feedback on their performance from an expert. Then the employees discuss ways to apply their knowledge and skills on the job. So this is really useful because you're creating a back and forth discussion about the best practices on the job, and you're providing feedback on the spot. Now, it really does take a great deal of time and effort to develop an engaging and effective training program. And research suggests that the estimated time it takes to create a presentation is from 16 to 50 hours of preparation for every hour of training. And this includes the needs analysis and the training and development piece of this. I can attest to that. These lectures take a really long time to create. And hopefully you've never experienced a situation where you felt silly for not anticipating possible problems in a classroom training. But it can be pretty embarrassing if you show up for a classroom training and something goes awry, something unexpected happens, and you are not prepared to handle it and you're fumbling in front of your trainees. So some things you need to think about, right? Some anticipated problems. So think about technology in the room. I would suggest you go to the room and play with the technology that you're going to be using prior to delivering the training. You need to make sure, for instance, that there's a way to connect your projector to your iPad if you plan on using your iPad to give a presentation. If you're planning on using the whiteboard, you better make sure that the dry erase markers in the room aren't dry or that you have dry erase markers on the day of your presentation. You also need to make considerations about, what if extra people show up? How can I accommodate them? What if the weather is bad? How can I reschedule or make accommodations for that? Also, you need to consider what the audience may need. So, are they going to need papers and pens or calculators? If so, you need to be prepared to bring that on the day of your training. Also, you need to prepare your talk and really hone in on your timeline for your training and how your lecture will be integrated with activities. Also, take note on ways to get the audience engaged throughout the classroom training process. And then make sure that you practice. Practice your spiel, right? Get prepared so that you sound like the expert and people will respect where you're coming from and not question you and what you know about the topic. So one major disadvantage to classroom instruction is that all employees must be taught at the same pace. This is often ineffective. Employees and students alike have varying levels of knowledge and skill. So to allow employees to learn material at their own pace and at a time and pace that's convenient for them, many organizations and colleges, this is a good example, right, use some form of individual training. So training that is at your own pace. And it's not necessarily with a group of people. When using training books or guides and videos, employees are provided with media material for learning the content. Then employees answer questions that test their knowledge of the content that was covered in the materials they were given. Trainees learn at their own pace and complete the training section by section, and then take quizzes and move on once they get a good enough grade on the quiz or exam. So rather than using books or videos for individual learning, many organizations are using computer-based training and e-learning. And with this, employees can choose from a variety of training programs offered on site, through the internet, or through the organization's intranet. So if you see there, you can click a link for an article about the impact of technology on training safety. That's really interesting. If you click on computer-based training link, you'll see that article there. So individual training can be criticized because we instinctively think that human-to-human contact is needed to teach. But as a result of technology, we can now do much of this virtually, using video links, virtual role plays, even augmented reality. If you want to see a really cool example of augmented reality, you can click on the link and you'll see a video about how the military uses augmented reality for training. So there's some forward-thinking businesses and organizations that are already embracing these techniques, and the expectation is that the use of virtual training will become commonplace in the future. Now, another common method of computer-based training and e-learning is interactive video. So with interactive video, employees see a videotape situation on a television or computer screen, and at the end of each situation, employees choose their response to the situation, and the computer shows a video that depicts what would have happened if the employee had made that decision. So another advance in individual training is social media. So nowadays, businesses can no longer ignore the impact of social media. And the immediacy, informality, individual empowerment, and really the community building aspects of social media make it a pretty good platform for effective training that allows multiple trainees to interact without ever leaving their home. Now, although social media content will initially be delivered by the employer or the trainer, it can be enhanced or made practical by users who can share their notes, rate courses, contribute to the ideas presented, right? So you can tell people in a discussion board, oh man, this course is really good. You guys should participate in it. Or here are some notes I took if you guys want to use them, or here's some additional resources I found, all through social media. If you click on the link that says social media, you can learn more about Canvas Commons. Canvas Commons is a way that, or is a social media platform for educators, and it's a way for educators to share content with each other. So some people will upload entire courses to Canvas Commons, and various educators can steal and borrow and adapt those courses for their own needs. So there's some major advantages to individual-based training. The primary advantage is that it can be pretty convenient, it can save money, it does not require the assistance of a trainer, and it can be completed off-site. Now, keep in mind that it only becomes convenient once you have it developed, right? It can be pretty expensive to either purchase or develop individual training tools. Another advantage is that the trainee is actively involved because they're guiding their own learning. Also, material is presented in small, more retainable units at the trainee's pace. So they can, again, guide their own learning, pause if they need to, rewind if they need to, much like this video. Also, when the speed of the material parallels the comprehension speed of the learner, the material will be learned really well versus a situation where you go to a lecture, the material is presented too fast for comprehension, and you're frustrated and you didn't learn as much and you can't go back and review it. So training that's individualized can also come in many languages. So that'll reduce the negative impact of language barriers on employee training and help you meet the criteria for equal employment opportunity law. Now, individual training is critical for helping keep employees up to date on job-related technology and processes without the need to halt work and provide classroom training. So individual employees can continuously improve their knowledge and their skills and their abilities through individual training. And in today's workforce, employees can no longer rely on what they learned at school for their entire career. Continuous learning and professional development is really an integral aspect of many jobs, especially in our tech-based economy that requires constant skill upgrades. In the previous section, I discussed how employees can be trained in classroom settings and through individual self-guided learning. But in this section, I'll show you how employees learn through on-the-job training. On-the-job training, or OJT, is typically informal training by experienced peers and supervisors that occurs on the job and during the completion of job tasks. On-the-job training is pretty popular. Researchers estimate that about 60% of training is on-the-job training. So it's important to understand that not all on-the-job training is, super official and geared towards performance that managers would desire you have, right? So there's something called behavioral modeling or social learning. And this is a very informal socialization process that helps you adapt to the widely accepted behavioral norms in the workplace. With behavioral modeling, employees who are unsure how to behave learn by watching how other employees perform. So we learn how to behave at work by watching others, really essentially so that we'll fit in, right? So you may look around and you say, they're taking way too much time on their breaks. And you may think, hey, maybe I can take more time on my breaks too. Or maybe you'll see that most employees treat customers really politely, and in an effort to fit in and just to be a good employee, you also treat customers politely. Or maybe you see that the fellow employees don't pay very much attention to their work, so you start to slack off to fit in so that you don't look like you're trying to outdo them, but also because you're not really that motivated if everybody around you isn't that motivated. Now, it's important to note that employees don't model everyone's behavior, but employees and people in general tend to model behavior of people who are similar to them or who are successful and have high status. But especially if you find somebody who's similar to you and is successful, then you're really going to want to model that person's behavior and essentially follow in their footsteps. Now, this kind of raises an important issue for diversity in university and work settings. So, if we learn best from those who are similar to us and have status, it's essential that school faculty be representative of the student population and for subordinates to feel that they are really represented in management. So, I can tell you from experience, I worked in a situation where all the employees were female and all the management was male, and problems definitely ensued. It was not a good situation. No representation of the ladies. So, another excellent on the job training method is called job rotation. And as the name suggests, this is when an employee performs several different jobs within an organization. And job rotation is especially popular for managerial training because it allows a manager trainee to experience and understand most, if not all, of the jobs within the organization that will be under his command or her command. Now, with job rotation, these organizations believe that managers will perform better by understanding more clearly how each employee performs their job. Job rotation is also used for cross-training, so this allows for more smooth transfers or being more flexible with the ability to cover for call-offs, because if you have cross-trained employees from other areas, they can fill in for you. Cross-training also helps keep employees engaged by providing task variety. So when we start to talk about employee motivation, you'll see that task variety is really important for keeping employees engaged. Now, another type of on-the-job training is apprentice training, and this is really just typically found in the crafts and trades, such as carpentry and plumbing, more technical fields. Apprenticeship usually takes about 150 hours of formal classwork and working with an expert for several years to learn and perfect a particular trade or become eligible for certification or a trade union. Apprenticeships are great for both the apprentice and the expert. So the apprentice learns a valuable trade and the expert or the organization gets inexpensive labor. But usually apprentices are paid. Internships are much like apprenticeship training, but are more short-term and focused on less technical jobs like counseling or marketing or human resource management. And usually interns are students who are participating in an internship that's affiliated with their college or university. And most interns, well, many interns aren't necessarily paid, but they do receive course credit in most cases. Often, internships result in job offers, and they always provide students to gain real-world experience while gaining practical knowledge and skills. And the best internships are the ones where there's a faculty member involved in making sure that not only are the students performing well, but also that the internship site is giving the students real opportunities to learn and develop important skills, that the students aren't just there making coffee and taking out the trash. So it's important that internship sites and students are both held accountable to make the internship experience the most worthwhile. So a really critical part of making sure that you have a good training program is using data to evaluate training effectiveness. So making sure that the training had the desired effect and the desired outcomes, not only on your employees, but on the organization as a whole. And I'll go over the 3 different major types of research methodology and how those could be applied to evaluating training success and effectiveness. The most commonly used method to evaluate training effectiveness is measuring employee reactions to training. To accomplish this, you just ask employees if they enjoyed and learned from the training. Now, employee reactions are subject to bias, but they're really still important because employees will not have confidence in the training and will not be motivated to use it if they don't like the training process itself. So, when you're testing employee knowledge, you can assess how well the training worked by giving employees a quiz about relevant job knowledge that was supposed to be gained through training. And computer-based technology is often used to efficiently assess how much the trainee learned from the training and how prepared they are for the job. So not just their reactions, how they felt, but also how much they know now that they've completed the training. Now there's something that's called computer adaptive testing, or CAT, and this is a method for administering exams that merges computer technology with modern measurement or psychometric theory to increase the efficiency of the exam process. So, computer adaptive testing is used to more quickly assess knowledge gained from training by requiring fewer questions. So, the way that it works is that if you answer questions correctly, then you get more and more difficult questions. And then you do not have to answer as many questions because your knowledge has been assessed with, more difficult, higher level understanding questions. So, they know the test, is smart. It knows if you understand how to apply concepts, then you've probably memorized terminology associated with those concepts, so no need to ask you about vocabulary words. That's for example. The NCLEX and many of the entrance exams used for graduate schools use computer adaptive testing. And if you click on the link there that says computer adaptive testing, you'll see a neat video that shows how computer adaptive testing is used for the NCLEX exam and just what computer adaptive testing is in general. So you can also examine individual level outcomes based on the application of training. So the effectiveness or the degree of application of training is really just the extent to which employees actually use learned material. And you can assess this through supervisor observation, performance appraisals. Coworkers can help you assess this too. Also, subordinates can help assess their supervisor, and secret shoppers can help you figure out how well your employees are applying their training. Performance appraisals are what most organizations use because it's usually just a completely formalized, pre-existing system that's really just already in place to determine training needs, merit raises, and other bonuses. So although all of these individual outcomes do not appear to be numeric in nature, it's really important that you understand that these outcomes need to be measured in some numeric way. So, for example, to measure employee reactions, you could develop or find a previously validated survey measure that assesses how well or how employees felt about the training and if they feel the training helped prepare them for the job. And then you would have multiple items to assess various aspects of these perceptions. And to make it numeric, each answer could be rated on a numeric scale from 1, not at all, to 10, extremely well. Even with observations, the supervisor or coworker or secret shopper would need to have a standardized rating scale to assess all of the different aspects of performance that were the target of training. Now, finally, the best performance appraisals result in numeric values, indicating success for various aspects of performance. So in that example I showed you earlier with Dexter and Piper. So the values in the performance appraisal again make it really easy to compare employees and determine the relative worth of employees when it comes to salaries and bonuses. Also, you want to evaluate training success based on business impact. So you want to figure out if the goals for training were met based on, maybe alcohol sales, right? So if you're training alcohol up sales, you can evaluate that by seeing how much Absolute vodka and Patron tequila are sold. If you're trying to train people to upsell and sell those things, right? So just looking at a specific criterion that you were concerned with in the business. Now, return on investment is a more broad perspective on organizational level outcomes. And you have to think training is really expensive, right? It's expensive to develop, purchase, and implement. So it's critical to monitor your return on investment. That is, after accounting for the cost of training, did the organization actually save money? So the return on investment approach would ask, if we spent $10,000 on the training of bank tellers, how much more revenue was brought in as a result? So if there's more revenue that happened after you implemented the training, and after you account for the fact that training is expensive, then you would consider the program a success. Now, I want to point out that these methods are correlational in nature because all employees or former trainees are examined as a whole in a single group. Now, it's true that something was manipulated, right? Training, that's a manipulated thing. It's an independent variable in this case that we think has an impact on performance, which would be our dependent variable. But these examples fail to control for pre-existing employee knowledge, skills, and abilities, and pre-existing differences in organizational success that happened prior to training. So you cannot be sure how much the training actually impacted employee behaviors and how much of those differences in performance are just driven by individual differences among employees. The most practical of research designs implements a training program and then determines whether significant change is seen in performance or job knowledge. To use this method, some measure of performance or job knowledge must be measured twice. Once prior to training, such your pre-test, and then the second after the implementation of training, or your post-test. Although the pre-test post-test method is fairly simple, the findings are difficult to interpret because there's no control group to compare results to. So suppose there's no significant increase in performance that's observed between pre-test and post-test. The natural conclusion might be that the training program did not work. But without a control group, this may not be the case. Perhaps other factors that were not accounted for diminish the impact of training. So there's another approach that's quasi-experimental as well. So if you want to test the effectiveness of a newly developed training method, you could give that training program to new hires, then compare their performance to the population of current employees who have not received the new training. This is also fairly simple, but fails to control for pre-existing differences among employees that have nothing to do with the training. So again, there's a big lack of control in that case. Now, these two approaches are considered quasi-experimental because there is that lack of control and there's a lack of randomization. So in the pre-test post-test example, all the trainees are given the same training. So there's really no opportunity to randomize participants to groups in hopes of having equivalent groups pre-training to compare post-training. And if you look at a lack of control with the pre-test post-test, it relies on a single group with no control group. There's no way to control for events other than the training that took place between the pre-test and post-test. So for example, let's say that Zappos implements a new customer service training program that's really aimed at strengthening relationships with customers. And the training emphasizes the importance of asking customers casual questions to get to know them and their needs. So 6 months after the training, Zappos researchers examined the change in customer satisfaction, and they find that customers feel less connected to their sales reps after the training. So at first, it may appear that the training actually had the opposite of the desired effect and actually resulted in less customer closeness. However, it's discovered that there was a new incentive program that was introduced that incentivizes and provide bonuses for short call times. And it was introduced immediately after the training was complete. Well, that incentive made employees prioritize short call times over customer relationships, and that is what led to the actual decrease in customer satisfaction. So it essentially contaminated the results of the study and resulted in a post-test that wasn't really impacted so much by training, but by some other event that took place. Now, if you look in the second design, where you're comparing new trainees to untrained or current employees, trainees may be substantially different than the current employees, regardless of the training, right? So you don't really know why the differences were observed. So again, there's a lack of randomization, which pretty much results in a lack of control and confidence that what you observed is really due to what you manipulated, right? That the changes in performance are due to the training. So in those quasi-experimental methods, it was really just assumed that a certain training tool was going to work well, and it was just implemented company-wide. But it's actually really smart to test the effectiveness of the training tool in a sample of employees first, so that you avoid wasting a lot of time and money implementing a training program company-wide or for all new recruits that doesn't really have the payoffs that you're hoping it would. Now, it's also critical to test the effectiveness of the training before full-scale implementation to avoid any kind of EEO liability. So if you're implementing training company-wide that threatens to disadvantage any protected class members, you need to be able to prove that that training is actually critical to performance. Now remember, a true experiment is the only way to be sure that you can make causal inference based on the results of a study with a sample. Also remember that the 3 criteria for a true experiment are randomization, manipulation, and control. So for randomization, that just really means that participants must be, or trainees must be randomly selected from all employees and randomly assigned to different groups. And these groups must differ based on the different levels of the independent variable, or in this case, the different types of training. Then manipulation just gets at the fact that a third party or a trainer must be in control of the training. So the experimenter is manipulating the independent variable, right? So there also must be different levels of the training, or at least one experimental group or trained group and one control or not trained group. And then to meet the criteria for control, the researcher must be able to either experimentally or statistically control for anything else other than the training, in this case, that may have an impact on performance or the outcome of interest. So in other words, we want to make sure that the only thing impacting the dependent variable, or the performance, is the independent variable, or the training. So you'll see that pictured here is something called the Solomon 4 groups design. And it really uses 4 different groups to determine, with a pretty high degree of certainty, if training causes observed changes in job knowledge or performance. Now, it's important to note that the same or equivalent measures need to be used for the pre-tests and post-tests. So the pre-tests for group A and B need to be the exact same test, and then the post-tests for all the groups either need to be exactly identical to the pre-test or something equivalent. Something equivalent is better because you minimize the impact of the pre-test on the post-test if you're not using the same exact measure. So these measures, these pre-tests and post-tests, can either be measures of employee reactions, scores on a knowledge test, maybe observation ratings from supervisors, or performance appraisal scores. So if you look at groups A, B, C, and D, you'll see group A is our experimental group. And they're experimental group A. They're the first experimental group. The reason they're an experimental group is because they received the training. And you see group A, they are pre-tested, so their performance is measured. Then they receive training, and then they later on are measured again for their performance. Group B is a control group because they don't receive training. They receive the pre-test, and then later on, at the same time that group A receives the post-test, Group B receives the post-test. Then Group C is an experimental group because they receive the training, but unlike Group A, they do not take the pre-test. And then Group D is a control group because they do not receive the training, but they are still measured for their post-test. And if you look at this, it's kind of neat because I can show you how you can compare different results, different pre-tests and post-tests, to eliminate the influence of other factors that could impact training or impact performance that are not related to training or that are not training. So if you look at all the post-test scores, so if Group A and C have much better scores on job knowledge or performance post-tests compared to Group B and D, then you can be confident that the trained group's performance is higher than the untrained group's performance, and training probably improved job knowledge. Now, if you notice a large difference between the post-tests for Group B and for the post-test for Group D, or the 2 control groups with no training, then you might be worried that the pre-test impacts the post-test. So maybe the pre-test is the only difference in experiences of groups B and D, so that can be the only explanation for differences between groups B and D. If you observe large differences between the pre-test for Group B and the post-test for Group D, so looking at performance before training, then you might be afraid that external events influenced job knowledge or performance. Finally, if you see large differences in the post-tests for Group A and the post-test for Group C, then you may be worried that the pre-test is actually having an impact on training effectiveness. So you have to be really careful when you analyze all these different comparisons to see if what you're thinking is actually happening, and it's the training that's influencing the differences in the post-tests. Now imagine the cost and time associated with such a sophisticated design. It would be pretty enormous to do a test like this, but there are many organizations where they have so many employees and they're training for so many different things that this type of analysis is easy to do because there's a ton of people to select from, and it's worth the cost because they want to make sure without a doubt that the training program that they're implementing is having the desired effect. Now, don't stress about the nitty-gritty details of this design. I just wanted to expose you to this because I think it's a really neat way to show how you can develop a sophisticated design that leads to results that tell you, yes, training actually does have an impact on performance. So, unlike general training for job skills, career development is trained at specific individuals who either have some performance deficits or are promising candidates for management or for executive leadership. Now, at the most basic level, the supervisor will explain each employee's performance appraisal to them and offer suggestions for improvement and praise for accomplishments. That's the most basic of career development. But at the highest level, an employee has the guidance of a high-level employee who helps them gain access to opportunities to advance within their organization, as well as helping them build a stronger resume and networking with connections for future opportunities. Career development is really the responsibility of the individual and the organization. So everyone should really take time to step away from the day-to-day grind of work and spend some quality time reflecting on your career and developing some plans for your future. So whether you love your current job and employer or if you feel frustrated and confined by your job, career planning can really help you. Think of career planning as building bridges from your current job or career to your next job or career. Without the bridge, you may easily stumble or lose your way. But with the bridge, there's some safety and direction. So, some career planning exercises for your own personal career development could be first, think about your current or desired future lifestyle. Think about your likes and your dislikes and your passions and your strengths and your weaknesses. And then think about your definition of success and analyze your current situation. So before you can do any planning, you need to really just clearly and realistically identify your starting point and where you'd like to end up. Once you've developed a picture of yourself, you can make a plan for achieving your career goals. So you can identify your next career move, right? If you've been examining multiple career paths, now's the time to narrow down those choices and focus on one or two careers. Then you can conduct detailed career research and gather information on the careers that most interest you. You can pinpoint the qualifications you need to move to the next step in your career. You can also think about comparing your current qualifications with those of your dream career and see how far apart those two profiles are. If your current qualifications and those of your dream career are pretty well matched, maybe it's time to switch to a job search or maybe just try to see if there's other opportunities out there. If there's a big gap between qualifications and your dream career, then it's time to develop a plan to get qualified. Make a list of the types of qualifications you need to enhance your standing or your next career move. Think about getting additional training, certification, or gaining experience. Develop a timeline and action plan for achieving each type of goal, and be sure to set specific goals and priorities. That's just some general advice for your own individual career planning. But from an organizational perspective, career counseling should also be available to employees. And career counseling goes beyond training and helps employees manage their career goals and develop a plan for obtaining the necessary training and education to meet those goals. So once you're informed by your own career planning, you can get the most out of career counseling through your employer. Now, it's the jobs of managers, coaches, and mentors to ensure that employees have guidance and training and are on the trajectory to a successful and fulfilling career that's really based on their strengths, weaknesses, and interests. So, employees who are receiving career development support that comes from managers and coaches and mentors really tend to be more committed to the organization and are less likely to quit and have higher performance. So a manager or an employer is really just responsible for performance appraisals, giving orders, and has control over employment and promotion opportunities. But a manager or employer can also be a coach or mentor. coaching and mentoring are managerial skills. The most practical and important tool that managers can use to support employees' career development needs is regular, realistic, and candid career oriented appraisals that have an emphasis on matching strengths and weaknesses with career paths and development opportunities. Now, a mentor is a little bit different from a manager or supervisor. This is somebody who is a senior member of the organization who informally advises, counsels, and guides employees towards long-term career advancement. So, you're really just a mentor shows an employee the ropes. They help employees navigate potential career hazards like office politics or difficult supervisors. And they advise employees on how to show managerial potential by encouraging them to participate in important projects and by helping them set high standards for themselves. The mentor establishes trust with the employee and guides their motives and career path based on kind of what the mentor thinks success looks like. Now, a coach is different from a mentor. Even though they're more formally educating the employee, they're instructing the employee, and they're really training employees to improve performance for specific tasks. This is usually geared towards maybe fixing performance problems and not so much, mentoring somebody to become your protege. Coaching helps employees identify development needs and obtain training to strengthen performance, and it helps minimize voluntary turnover due to inadequate training. So there's some steps to effective coaching. You want to make sure that you're prepared. If you're going to be a coach, you want to identify the employee's training needs by observing the employee and reviewing performance appraisals. You also want to plan and work with the employee to develop a customized plan that helps them strengthen their weakness and leverage their strengths and work towards an agreed upon goal. The actual coaching should really teach the employee how to perform short-term job-related skills and then refer them to professional development opportunities when appropriate, like workshops and online training. Coaching should also involve follow-up, where you monitor the implementation of the new skills that the employee has learned, and you make sure that performance problems do not reemerge. So now that you know a little more about career development, you can imagine how beneficial these types of opportunities could be for employees who are looking to maybe make the next career move or looking to strengthen or build their resume or vita. So here are some examples of how career development can also benefit the employer, not just the employee. Because research suggests that when you offer career development for employees, they're more satisfied with their job. They're more engaged. They're more excited about their work. They have hope for the future. They're going to be more productive. They're going to work harder because they feel like you're investing in them. So then they want to work harder for you, and they feel like working harder is also going to lead to desirable results and better prospects in the future. So it's important to realize that it's not just about training for the skills that you need today, but also helping employees build their skills and strengths so that they will be more happy in the workplace and also better able to move up within your company and be a more productive member of your workforce.